Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In Islamic history and mythology, the name Unuq or Anāq bint Adam is often associated with the story of the first woman to commit adultery. However, this story has no strong basis in the Qur'an or authentic hadith. Most of the stories about it come from Israiliyat sources, stories originating from the children of Israel, and ancient legends. Nevertheless, many are interested in discussing Unuq because her story concerns the early history of mankind and warns against sinning. Who is Unuq? According to several sources of the story, Unuq was one of the daughters of the prophet Adam and Eve. In a more legendary story, it is mentioned that she was the first child born to Adam and Eve before Cain and Habil. Some versions of the story also mention that she was a woman who had a very large body size and extraordinary strength, even said to be taller than a date palm tree. Unuq is depicted as a figure who is arrogant, proud, and does not obey the rules given by Allah. It is said that she was the first woman to commit adultery, and from here emerged various sins that were followed by the next generation. Unuq's adultery story, it is said that Allah has set rules for the children of Prophet Adam in their marriage. Every time Eve gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, then they were not allowed to marry their own twins, but had to marry twins from other births. This was intended so that human offspring would develop without too close blood relations. However, Unuq is said to have violated this rule and had an illicit relationship. There are several versions of the story regarding which partner committed adultery with him. Unuq and Qabil. In this version, it is said that Unuq was attracted to her own brother, Qabil. She urged him to marry her, but the rules set by Prophet Adam forbade it. Qabil, who was also known as the killer of Abel, finally gave in to her wishes and had an illicit relationship with her. Unuq and the jinn or devil. There is also another story that mentions that Unuq committed adultery with creatures other than humans, such as the jinn or even the devil. This made him even more shunned by the family of Prophet Adam, and Allah cursed him for his actions. Unuq and other creatures. Some stories mention that Unuq committed adultery with another human who was not a descendant of Adam. This has led to much speculation about the existence of other creatures that lived during the early days of human creation. Unuq's fate. In this story, due to his actions, it is said that Unuq received punishment from Allah. In some versions, he was killed by his own father, the Prophet Adam, as a form of punishment and warning to his descendants. There is also a story that says that he was struck by a disaster that caused him to die in a terrible way. This story is often associated with the origin of sinful acts among humans, especially adultery. Unuq is said to be the pioneer of sin that later developed in the next generation. Therefore, his name in some sources is considered a symbol of moral destruction. Is this story true? Although the story of Unuq appears frequently in non-canonical sources, there is no strong evidence in the Qur'an or authentic hadith for its existence. The story is more commonly found in Israiliyat literature, stories adapted from Jewish and Christian beliefs. Some scholars believe that the story of Unuq is just a legend that developed among certain communities and cannot be used as a basis for understanding Islamic history. They assert that in Islam, the law of adultery was only regulated after Islam was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, so there were no specific rules about adultery in the time of the Prophet Adam. Lessons from the story of Unuq. Regardless of its historical truth, Unuq's story contains several lessons to be learned. The importance of maintaining personal purity. In Islam, adultery is a major sin that has dire consequences for individuals and society. The story of Unuq is often used as a warning of the dangers of sinful acts. Avoiding arrogance and haughtiness. Unuq is said to be an arrogant figure who does not obey Allah's rules. Arrogance is often the beginning of various other sinful acts. The importance of following God's rules. God has set rules in human life so that they live well and avoid destruction. Violating these rules can have bad consequences for both the individual and future generations. Conclusion. The story of Unuq is a legend that has developed among certain communities, but has no strong basis in authentic Islamic sources. However, this story remains interesting because it contains a moral message about the importance of maintaining personal purity and obeying Allah's commands. Although there is no real evidence of its existence, This story is often associated with the origins of adultery and how humans began to violate the rules set by Allah. Like other stories, the story of Unuq should be used as food for thought and not as a source of law or history that is absolutely true. Although the story of Unuq has been told in many literatures and mythologies, there are several things that need to be criticized regarding the validity of this story. Not in the Qur'an and hadith. The story of Unuq is never mentioned in the Qur'an or authentic hadith. All stories about him come from sources outside Islam, such as Israiliyat stories or ancient mythology. In Islam, something that has no basis in primary sources cannot be used as historical fact. Most likely just a legend. Some historians and scholars argue that the story of Unuq is just a legend developed by certain communities to explain the origins of the sin of zina in the world. Many such stories have developed in various cultures, especially in the Jewish and Christian traditions that have narratives about early human figures who committed major sins. The origin of the name Unuq. The name Unuq, or Anāq, is also unknown in more authoritative Islamic literature. Some believe that this name comes from mythology or folklore, which was later associated with the Prophet Adam and his family. Contradictions with the concept of law in Islam. In Islam, the law on adultery was only established after Islam developed, especially after the revelation of the Sharia to the Prophet Muhammad. During the time of the Prophet Adam, there was no law that specifically regulated adultery as we know it today. Therefore, calling Unuq the first woman to commit adultery is a claim that has no strong basis. Comparison with other stories. The story of Unuq is often compared to several other legends in world mythology, Lilith's story in Jewish mythology. In Jewish tradition, there is a figure similar to Unuq, namely Lilith. Lilith is said to be the first woman before Eve who was created with Adam, but she refused to submit to Adam and was eventually expelled from heaven. Some versions say that Lilith then committed adultery with the devil and gave birth to evil offspring. Pandora in Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman created by the gods. She was given a box containing all the evils of the world, and out of curiosity, she opened it, causing evil to spread throughout the world. This story has similarities in how the first woman is seen as the beginning of the moral downfall of a civilization. Stories in ancient mythology. Almost every civilization has a story about a woman who is responsible for the spread of sin or moral decay, such as the Christian story of Eva and other myths that describe how humans began to commit moral transgressions from the beginning of their existence. Regardless of whether Unuq's story is true or not, there are several lessons that can be learned from this story. Don't easily believe stories that don't have strong sources. As Muslims, we must be careful in accepting information, especially that related to the history of the prophets and the first humans. The Qur'an and the authentic hadith are the main sources that must be used as guidelines. The importance of maintaining morality in society. The story of Unuq, although not proven to be true, teaches a lesson about the importance of maintaining Allah's rules and avoiding sin. Adultery is considered a major sin in Islam because it can damage the lives of individuals and society. Respecting God's laws and rules. In human history, many events occurred because humans did not obey the laws that had been set by God. Therefore, stories like this can be used as a reflection so that we always obey religious rules. Final conclusion. The story of Unuq as the first woman to commit adultery is interesting to discuss, but it does not have a strong basis in Islam. This story comes more from mythology and legends that have developed in various cultures. However, this story still has a moral value that can be taken as a warning for humans to always maintain their purity and stay away from sin. In Islam, stories like this should be studied with a critical attitude and not used as absolute historical facts. The most important thing is to take wisdom from these stories to live a better life according to Islamic teachings. The story of Unuq is a legend that developed outside of authentic Islamic sources. There is no evidence in the Qur'an or hadith for his existence, let alone how he died. However, this story is often used as a warning symbol of the dangers of sin and the importance of obeying Allah's rules. As Muslims, we must be wise in responding to stories like this. If it does not have a strong basis in Islamic teachings, then we should not consider it as a historical fact, but rather as a moral lesson from which wisdom can be learned. The most important thing is to live a life by avoiding sin and always holding fast to the true teachings of Islam. The story of Unuq remains a mystery, as there is no historical or religious evidence to support his existence. However, in various traditions, he is depicted as a symbol of the beginning of sinful deeds. As Muslims, we don't need to focus too much on this story, but rather on the moral values that can be taken from it. What is more important is to understand the true teachings of Islam about adultery, obedience to Allah, and how to live a life in accordance with His rules. So did Unuq really exist, or was it just a legend? The answer is uncertain. However, what is certain is that Islamic teachings emphasize the importance of maintaining morals and avoiding actions that are forbidden by Allah. For some, he is a symbol of the beginning of moral deviation, while for others, he is simply part of an ancient mythology that has evolved from one generation to another. What is clear is that Islam does not make the story of Unuq part of the official history of humanity. As Muslims, we are better off focusing on the teachings that have been established in the Qur'an and hadith, and making this story only as a source of reflection and not the absolute truth.